Well, howdy, folks. Welcome to the December edition of Cattle Trails Showcase. I'm Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate. Glad to be your host. Today, we are zooming to Dallas, Texas to learn some fascinating history relating to the centennial of the Chisholm Trail from a man who lived it firsthand. So we're excited about that. The purpose of the Cattle Trails Showcase is to continually highlight the community's historical elements, museums, and other attractions along the Chisholm and the Western Cattle Trail. This showcase is brought to you by the International Chisholm Trail Association, of which Dennis Katzmeyer is president. He's with us today. Michael Grauer is vice president, Nancy Lawrence is secretary, and Mary Lou Rivers is treasurer. And Lonnie Steben is our showcase chair. So in 2017, as you know, we celebrated the 150th anniversary of the Chisholm Trail. In 2023, we will celebrate the 150th anniversary of the Ellsworth Cutoff portion of the Chisholm Trail. And today, we're going to hear from an individual who played a fundamental role in helping the nation celebrate the centennial of the Chisholm Trail. And to introduce our special guest, I will call on our own Steve Myers. Steve?
Thank you, Ron. Today we have John Crain. John served as chairman of the board of directors of the Summerlee Foundation and is a director of the Bryan Museum. He is past president of the Texas State Historic Association and is one of the life members of the executive committee. He is also a former chair of the Dallas County Historic Commission and advisory director of the Texas State History Museum Foundation and a director of the Southern Methodist University Clemens Center. John received a bachelor's degree from the University of Texas, Austin, and a master's degree from the Texas State University. He also has a certification in arts management from Harvard University and a certificate in museum management from the University of California at Berkeley. From what I heard, John's biggest adventure was in 1967 when he volunteered to travel with the Chisholm Trail Museum car for the 100th anniversary. Good morning, John, and take us on that great adventure.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's like an obituary. Actually, it's hard to believe that I've been involved in so many things over the years. But one of the great things was certainly the Chisholm Trail Centennial Rail Museum, and I'm sorry that we can't connect with through YouTube and show that little 3-minute segment, but I hope that everybody who is interested in this subject will go to YouTube and at least see what the rail museum looked like in that point in time.
John, I can show that video if you'd like.
Okay, great. If you've got it, love to see it.
We'll go ahead and try to do that.
Yeah. Why don't we do that now?
Well, the Chisholm Trail railcar was an artifact in and of itself. I think it had been a sleeper car for Santa Fe. In 1967, which was the 100th anniversary of the Chisholm Trail, it was decided to have a railcar museum, which would travel throughout Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. And in the car, we had exhibits having to do with the Chisholm Trail. And they included art, included all kinds of documentary heritage, and a section of cowboy hats of famous Western cowboys in the movies. I was 23. I was in graduate school at the University of Texas, and I volunteered for the job. I then learned on the job exactly what my job was because no one had told me what I was to do. So I found out I'm security. So I ride with the car when it travels. I also am the one who deals with the press. One of the other sides of being curator is a number of dignitaries that were involved with the Centennial programs. And we had even the former president of the United States who was involved. One additional duty was to sell medallions, and also Wayne Guard's book on the Chisholm Trail that had been selected as the official book for the trail, and a pamphlet on the trail. And again, it was very, very important to have high sales of these materials. And so I received communications from the Texas Historical Survey Committee and from the Texas State Historical Association, others, that my sales quota had not been met. I needed to do a better job of selling products. We also have the beautiful stationery of the Chisholm Trail Centennial Commission. And so I was told that that was to be seldom used. I was supposed to use plain white paper, and on a rare occasion, depending upon if it was a VIP, I could use one of these. Tex Watson was a person that I worked with closely. Tex was the person who was in charge of maintenance of the railroad car. And that's when I learned the value of having sardines for lunch. Tex had sardines every day, along with a whole onion. And so we got very acquainted with this new system of eating sardines with crackers and onions. So when I wasn't working, we were just coming into town, I joined him and had some sardines. The visit to Belton was the highlight of my experiences on the trail. We had a huge crowd in Belton, and in fact, standing room only. And I think it was because of the Old Settlers Reunion, which is around the courthouse square. And also we had military vehicles from Fort Hood. And I remember being interviewed by Armed Forces Radio at the same time I'm trying to control the crowd. So it was a very unique period, very jubilant period for me. What I remember best is just having lengthy conversations with individuals who had ancestors who went up the trail. And if time had permitted, I would have recorded each and every one of these interviews because they would be priceless. These people were sharing these memories of their family and the Chisholm Trail, and it was important, but it was not something that was documented, unfortunately.
Thank you very, very much for that video.
Slovak sausage and Germanium.
Oops, sorry.
Bring you this.
Are we ready?
Yes, go ahead. Sorry, John.
Okay. Essentially, what I hope to do today are two different things. I want to talk about the Chisholm Trail Centennial Rail Museum and also talk about the importance of history in our schools today. And frankly, our history across the board. I hope that anyone who has questions feels free to ask or interrupt me. You know, if there's nothing here that can't be interrupted, I can assure you. You know, it's hard to believe that time passes by so fast. 67 seems like it was yesteryear. How did I get this job? Well, I was at home. I came home one day. My mother was fixing milk and cookies for Ken Ragsdale, who was, some of you may remember Ken. Ken was head of education for the Texas State Historical Association. And Ken said, "What are you doing this summer?" And I said, "Well, I plan to go to summer school." And he said, "Oh, no. I've got a job for you." So, you know, pocketbook was always important. So I decided that maybe I should go on this excursion on the Rail Museum, not knowing a thing about what I was getting myself in for. I was hired by the Texas State Historical Association, and then out of the blue, it was moved over to the Texas Historical Survey Committee, and I was under the auspices of Truett Latimer. Some of you may know Truett. Truett is still with us, and Truett was an amazing guy. He's the one who changed from the organization from a survey committee to the Texas State Historical Commission that I serve on today. Truett was kind of a tough guy. He was a former state legislator, and he liked a lot of things his way. And so I had to adjust to that. Now, we had a lot of dignitaries in Austin when we launched the Rail Museum. And, we ended up in San Antonio at Lone Star Brewery operation. We went on their siding, and it seemed to me that it served Lone Star Brewery a little more than it did the Centennial, but nonetheless, that's where we went. And it was at that point in time that I started surveying the museum itself. I didn't see the museum until I got aboard going to San Antonio. And basically, the museum had been planned by others. And one of the more notable things that people seemed interested in as they toured was the cowboy hat collection. And that was unique. And then there were a lot of exhibits having to do with the West. And, again, it was short and sweet. It was not a huge museum by any means, but it did tell the story of the Chisholm Trail. When we left San Antonio, we headed towards Galveston, and this was on the Missouri Pacific. And we got to Milano, Texas, and we had a little embarrassing situation develop. A gentleman with Missouri Pacific, a switch engine operator, decided to connect us to the Santa Fe line. And he apparently wasn't in full control of his senses. So we were smashed right into the back of all these cars from Santa Fe, meaning all of our glass display cases were broken. In fact, I was asleep, to tell you the truth, when all this happened. I was sleeping on the floor, as I was told to do. Whenever it was in motion, I had to stay aboard that train museum. And so I had glass all over a blanket that I had. And believe it or not, I had Tom Mix's hat on top of me. So again, that was my introduction in sorts of what I was in for. Fortunately, we managed to get some assistance in Galveston, and believe it or not, we got this thing running again. And that was a real plus, because I was concerned that I would be going right back to Austin. But fortunately, it was restored, and the display cases were put back in place, and everything went well. Now in Galveston and Houston, these two stops, I'll be honest with you, the location of the depot was a negative. Where the train was located was either a plus or a minus. And in both Galveston and Houston, we had limited attendance. Now, when we got to Temple, it picked up. And also, it really picked up when we got to Belton. And I mentioned in the other program about Belton. Here I am, one person, other than Tex Watson, who was my guy who was in charge of engineering on that vessel. We had to basically manage the crowd. And were it not for the survey committee members who showed up and assisted, it would have been totally out of control. We would have had to close down, because we were not ready for anything quite like that. And it was a great day in Belton, and it's very memorable. From there, we went to Cleburne, and the people in Cleburne love their history and love the Chisholm Trail. And we got a great reception in Cleburne. And I hope that there's some materials that exist on our Rail Museum trip in Cleburne. When we were trying to find material having to do with 1967 and this particular trip, believe it or not, we had problems finding archival material and photographs. So it's hard to believe in 1967, a lot of this material would be lost. Fortunately, it's in newspapers from time to time, and so we were able to solve that problem. The Army, U.S. Army in Belton, that's one thing I wanted to say, is they came to my rescue more than once. We had crowd control issues in Belton that were rather dynamic. We had people lined up quite a ways, and it was hot. We're talking July 4th. And the Army provided water, and it was just terrific what the Army, U.S. Army did. Now, the payback was I had to be on Armed Forces radio and be there on a regular basis, which meant who's going to manage the store? Who's going to be selling the products? And that was where we had a little breakdown, because the survey committee is wonderful. And a lot of people knew one another, but by golly, we didn't do very well on sales. And Truett Latimer, who was head of the survey committee, wasn't very pleased about that. When we left Cleburne, we headed to Gainesville. I was able to see some of my distant relatives who were from Nocona, and I had a great time getting to know some of them I'd never met. So that was a plus. We crossed the Red River. We were welcomed in Ardmore, Duncan, and El Reno. And in El Reno, it was kind of interesting. We were on the Rock Island line. And I was kind of curious about the security officers for Rock Island, because they all carried 2 guns and holsters. It was like the Old West. Well, I now I found out why. I was in the yard one night aboard the museum car, and there was an actual gunfight that took place in the yard between the security officers for Rock Island and some people trying to break in and steal stuff from other cars. So it was certainly an eye-opener. The Old West lives in El Reno. Then I traveled to Oklahoma City, where I was relieved by J.C. Martin. J.C. went on to become head of the San Jacinto Museum of History and a director of the Texas State Historical Association. At that point in time, I explained to J.C. that, the rules, that we have to keep costs down and you can't spend money liberally. If you're in Galveston, Texas, $25 for a motel room is the most you're going to get reimbursed for, and so forth, so on. So everything was certainly, we were very cautious about expenses. First thing JC does is go buy steak dinner at one of the most expensive hotels in Oklahoma City. He said, "I'm going to teach you how it's done." Well, I went with him and had my sandwich, and he had his steak. At any rate, it was kind of a fun experience. Thanks to Mr. Stubbe with Santa Fe Railroad, his people provided me with a pass, which allowed me to go to Newton, Kansas, and then connect with the Santa Fe and get to Amarillo, Texas, where I needed to go. And again, it was rather special to have that pass. And I thought, well, that's good for a year. I'm gonna take train trips all over the place. Of course, I never took another trip other than that trip to Amarillo. So it goes to show sometimes you get these wonderful gifts from people and they get buried away. As a footnote, the Missouri Pacific, became the Union Pacific in 1997. The Rock Island line was liquidated in 1980. The St. Louis and San Francisco, known as the Frisco, was purchased by Le Burlington in 1980. And the Santa Fe disappeared. It was purchased by the Burlington in 1996. So when we talk about railroad history, talk about something like this wonderful opportunity for a rail museum, thanks to Santa Fe and others, the world has changed. And the prospect of doing rail museums today is very remote. I'd love to see the Kansas Historical Society launch an effort like this, see how successful they could be. But at any rate, it was a challenge. So are there any questions at all about my exciting experience. I had to get back to school. I went through Amarillo so I could see my grandparents, and then went back to Austin so I could be, wouldn't miss that much of summer school.
John, there were references in the video to Governor John Conley and
Yes.
to President Eisenhower.
Yes,
Were you involved in those, or was that different?
I was involved with Governor Conley. He was the one who blessed the ceremony in Austin. And I was at the very back of the line, hidden from view. All the dignitaries were there. It was, a great time for legislators and the governor, and also some state agency people. And I was in the back, and finally someone took the governor over and said, "Oh, the guy's going to ride the train." And he said, "Well, nice to meet you." And that was my time with Governor Conley. I had occasion to be around Conley later, but this was the first time. And then on Eisenhower, I had nothing whatsoever to do with President Eisenhower. I was not a part of any of his involvement with this, but he was present, and I assume that was in Kansas, perhaps, maybe later in Oklahoma, but it was not anywhere along the line when I was there. But it was clearly put into this particular video, and I had no opportunity to see him. I had seen I like Ike in 1952 on Polk Street in Amarillo when he was campaigning. That was the only time I saw Ike. Even when I was in Gettysburg, I never saw Eisenhower. So that's my answer to that question. It's rather long. Any other questions?
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
John, what happened to the railroad car?
Railroad car we found. The railroad car is in Temple, Texas. It's among a group of cars that are destined for the trash heap. And we found the number of that particular car, which had been a sleeper at one point and a diner at one point, had been multi-use. And it is on this siding in Temple. And the Santa Fe archives are located in Temple, Texas, and they are fantastic. We thought we would never find that car, and we did. And it was quite an accomplishment. Unfortunately, it was locked up. We had no way to get inside. We wanted to take photographs of the interior, and we couldn't get in. It was secured, and I imagine because it was in the sort of a siding, they secured it. But I would recommend anyone who's interested in rail history to keep in mind that Santa Fe has marvelous archives.
Does that archives include a book on the history of the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe?
I cannot answer that. I do not know. My guess is that the Burlington Northern did not have control over the archive. It was a 501c3 at that time. The question is, what is it today? I do not know. I have not been back to Temple to check it out. Maybe our friend from Cleburne might know. I don't know.
One last question. You showed the medallion. Are there any of those medallions left?
If there were bound to be at one point in time. I noticed that they're for sale online. So they're from $9 to $14. So you can see they've risen in price. It's a real opportunity for medallion collectors. Much better than gold and silver.
Hello, John. This is Steve Myers.
Yes, Steve.
I have a question for you. In 1967, the Tri-State Chisholm Trail Centennial Commission got together to promote the history of the Chisholm Trail with the rail car. And from my research, the representative here in Texas was the mayor of Waco, I believe. How can we put together a tri-state group this day and age to promote the Chisholm Trail and making it a National Historic Trail and the Western Trail a National Historic Trail. I've been trying to get different groups here in Texas to come together where, you know, we could go out and really support our legislators on making the Chisholm Trail and the Western Trail a National Historic Trail. Do you have any ideas, or have you been involved in any of this?
My first thought would be, are we going to be going to Congress on this matter?
Well, we already have.
Is there any, so are you saying we just need to deal with matters on a state level?
Ron is our legislative person. Ron, do you want to bring John up to speed on the legislation?
Yes, Steve. There are a bipartisan group of legislators, primarily in Kansas and Oklahoma, that introduced legislation that would designate the Chisholm and the Western Cattle Trails as National Historic Trails. Actually, a group of bipartisan legislators a decade and a half ago introduced legislation for Interior to study it. And after a long process, the Department of Interior recommended that the trails be designated. There's still some controversy about naming and territory and so forth, but that legislation passed the House committee, but it's now stuck in the legislative process. So
Is it stuck in the Senate?
it is stuck in the Senate, and it's not moved to action on the House floor.
Well, my first thought, and again, I'm speaking for somebody who's not here, is the chairman of the Texas Historical Commission, John Now, is somebody that I would be leaning on, because John has a relationship with a Senator Cornyn, who could be very helpful to the cause. Maybe he already has been, but I think that there are a lot of people who would want to see this happen. And I can tell you that I'll do everything I can with THC to help on this matter.
Thanks, John.
Appreciate that greatly.
Ron, I think this would be a good opportunity maybe to get into a little bit of the history with the schools. I think our
Yeah.
speaker was
Yeah,
prepared.
I
to
don't
talk
want to
about
keep
that.
everybody might want lunch today. I'm going to show, I hope you all can see this. I Am Texas,
Yes,
I hope is visible.
yes.
This is a recent publication, and it was sponsored, and I will show you a little flyer that is in here. You'll see Phillips 66. You'll see, well, let me find all of them. Phillips 66, HEB, any number of other corporations involved in creating this book. It was done through the Bryan Museum when I'm on that particular board. And the whole idea was trying to reach young people with history. And we came up with this idea of the Guinness Book of Records is going to be broken by the largest book ever created. And it's going to be exhibited at several locations in Texas. And so the I Am Texas, this is a short version. There's a gigantic one that's going to be on exhibit at the State Fair and other sites, even the Alamo. And so it makes it special. Some of the work that these kids have done is just remarkable. The art that's in here, the short stories, the poems, it really engaged a lot of students throughout Texas. And the sad thing is that the students who were involved primarily were in Galveston and Houston area. They weren't in far west Texas, but these are the kind of things that can be done. Now, we had sponsors, and it really helped to have Phillips 66 involved in this program. I think they were extremely pleased. And so I would recommend that those of you who have an interest in education and ways to reach kids and get them involved in history, this is one way. Now, what we did is offered prizes, even college scholarships in some cases. So it was a matter of trying to reach out and trying to get kids involved in history. And some of the short stories that are written having to do with young people's families are unbelievable. So this particular book is available through the Bryan Museum if you'd like a copy. And the Bryan Museum is in Galveston. And again, they have you can just basically call the museum and get the bookstore and get an order placed if you're interested. But I just thought that it was a pretty nifty way to try to reach young people. We have some problems in today's world having to do with misunderstandings between various groups. And one of them, I sit on a group called Remember the Alamo Foundation. And you can imagine what it's like dealing with the Alamo. We have a lot of different parties with different ideas about what the Alamo should be and how it should be interpreted. And yet we're making a lot of headway. We're bringing people together. People are beginning to talk. We're starting to do the design for the new museum, which will be across the street from the Alamo. The state is saying they're going to put in a considerable amount of money. And I mean, we're talking about 500 million into this facility. It's going to be quite a showplace, but we've got to bring everybody to the table. This means indigenous people. This means Tejanos. This means our Mexican community. And it means all the folks in the South Texas. And so trying to find ways to get people to sit at the table and talk to one another is indeed a challenge. And I'm just pleased we're now moving in the right direction. Thanks to the city of San Antonio, Bexar County, and all the people who have been involved in trying to get folks just to be reasonable and let's talk it out. And it has not been easy, believe me. I think that one of the things, I've made some notes here. One of the things that I benefited from is that I had parents and I had grandparents who loved history. And I grew up in a world which was a little different than some people today. And my parents and grandparents were very interested in education. They were advocates for history. They loved telling stories about the past. We know that's not always the case today. It's just a reality. I guess that's how I got involved in the history field. It's just something that we need to do. The Texas State Historical Association at one time had very active junior historian programs throughout the state. And they were, where kids would have, have the history teacher would be in charge of the club, kids would be seventh graders, and you would learn a lot of history. And now our seventh grade programs are not what they once were. A lot of schools have turned their back on history. They've turned their back on civics. It is very bothersome to some of us who really appreciate the role of history. And I think that's the challenge that we face. I wish we had all the answers.
Well, John, we appreciate your leadership in this arena. That seems to me one of the beauties of the Tri-State Commission and the effort in 1967 was taking the Chisholm Trail history to the people. They didn't have to travel to one spot. The rail car actually took that history to them, and that's a commendable idea.
Well, it was certainly an experiment, and it had, if we had planned a little better, we would have been talking about all the great material that was collected on that trip. And surprisingly, that matter never came up. And yet our visitors, many of them had stories to tell about their family members. And some folks that I met even said they went up the trail. So any rate, it was an occasion to really gather material, and it was not utilized as well as it should have been. And it was a shortcoming and something that, looking back on it, I wish we had done more. Also, it would have been nice if we had two people at the, on the train rather than one. It made it very, very difficult to deal with a lot of issues, but that's a whole nother story.
I am so glad that the Texas Historical Commission produced that video. I mean, thank goodness that that archive, it mentioned the Wayne Guard book, the definitive reference on the Chisholm Trail. I have my copy of the Wayne Guard book here because I think it does an outstanding job of capturing the history.
Well, as you can imagine, when the word came out that Wayne Guard's book was going to be on there as the official book, some historians immediately got their guns out and said, Wayne Guard doesn't know anything. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Why do we have Wayne Guard on here? We need to have, a whole selection of books, but decision was made to go with Guard. It's your typical situation when you have a lot of people who work in the field, so to speak.
And I think Tom has a question. Tom Hawk?
Yeah, relative to all of you on this Zoom, I am a real newbie when it comes to the Chisholm Trail. If it weren't for an invitation in the spring of 21 to participate in the showcase, I would not be involved with this at all. But over the last little over a year, I have read probably 15 books on the cattle trails. And I've come to the conclusion that it is a rich and complex evolving tapestry of different perspectives. I mean, it's not only the cattle trails, but the cattle towns, the railroads, the Homestead Act, the indigenous people, the soil doves, the cattle kings, the cattle buyers. I still have not yet found a good history of the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe or the Union Pacific to fully understand their evolution as they moved westward across the plains. But it's all of you are much more familiar with this rich historical tapestry than I am, and I want to thank the ICTA board, Ron and Lonnie and Dennis and Nancy and Mary Lou for hosting me in May for my performing tour out there. It was just glorious. And not only the Chisholm Trail, but the Western Trail and the Goodnight Loving Trail and the Shawnee Trail systems. There's a whole, I knew next to nothing about the plains, the history of the plains states. When I started reading about this in the early fall of last year, and the little bit that I did know was myth, and that myth has been blasted away and filled in by this amazing, absolutely amazing, rich history of the cattle trails in the states and the indigenous clans of the area. I'm so looking forward to coming back out next May.
Well said, Tom. Well said. Again, one of the things that disappoints me is the trying to get access to rail records, especially relating to the Southern Pacific. I'm spent years trying to deal with those people, and it was not a positive, put it that way. the H&TC that went through Dallas was very critical, Houston, Texas Central, which is now a freeway. But, again, it would be so wonderful to have access to those records which are in walking distance from this office where the railroad was. And that's why the Caruth property where I am today was where they established their homestead was because of the railroad. And I really think the rails have a responsibility to try to assist us in trying to dig out material. And maybe some of you have had success. I have not. And I know THC has tried to do a number of things with railroads, and we haven't been as successful as we'd like to. So any of you have thoughts, let me know.
Hey, John, this is Steve.
Yes.
I live here in Fort Worth, and I went to Burlington Northern several years ago. I live out not too far from Saginaw, and Saginaw is really tight with Burlington Northern. And I talked to their historian, a lady there, I don't know if she's still there, and asked them about getting a rail car. And she said, well, you got to get a hold of Santa Fe in Nebraska. So I contacted the historian person in Nebraska, and they said, we shipped all the history records that we had to the Kansas State Historic Society. So if you want any information on that, you need to go to them. So I contacted the Kansas Historic Society and said, I understand you have all this information. And they said, yes, we do, but we don't have anyone to go through it. So it would be interesting to see if we could, make contact with someone there that could give us an inventory of what the information they do have there in Kansas.
And I'd be very curious what the difference is between the archive, the Santa Fe archive in Temple, Texas, that occupies 2 floors of a building, and what Kansas Historical has. I mean, maybe Kansas now has those collections. It worried me that it was basically a small group of people with a lot of records and with very few dollars to work with.
Well, that's
John,
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
this is Bruce Shackelford. And first of all, I've known John's, I don't know, since the late 80s, and he's been involved with just about every important project that's come out of the state of Texas with history. And a lot of them wouldn't have even happened without him. But
The money will
so
be,
thank you.
I'll send the money, Bruce.
Thank you. And I have to say, you've been behind a lot of the ones I've worked on. But on this railroad business, do you know Phil Anschutz?
I do.
Do you think Phil could help get in on that railroad business?
His sister could help a lot better than he could.
Okay. Because I mean, there's some power there.
Yeah, well, basically, I've had dealings with the foundation, and yes, there's a possibility, but sometimes going there is we could burn a couple of years of our lives trying to deal with Phil. I think that I like to follow the system as best I can and go from the bottom up, but as you say, sometimes it is tough. It's tough to get any help without going to the top. And that may be the way to do it, because he certainly has a voice and we can lean on that. We've had some, the Summerlee Foundation has had some unpleasant dealings with his oil company, unfortunately.
Well, we're folks, we're running out of time here, but let me echo Bruce's comments and Steve's comments to thank John for his leadership in promoting history through the years. Round of applause for John and your work through the years and for sharing this fascinating history of how the Chisholm Trail Centennial was celebrated in 1967.
Thank you for those kind words. Normally people say, well, we need to shut down and maybe move on to someone else. And so this is unusual to have anyone that is interested in this subject that I'm presenting, but Bruce is a good friend of mine. And so, you know, Bruce is at the table and I appreciate his kind words. But again, it's been fun. I hope that you will be kind enough to let me know how I can become an attendee of future programs, because sounds like you all have fun and love to talk history. And that's what I enjoy doing as well. So keep me posted.
Well, thank you very much, John. Appreciate that.
Okay.
We are excited about next month's showcase as well. Holy smoke, it's going to be a new year before we know it. So we'll ask Lonnie Stephen, our showcase chair, to tell us about what's coming next.
Okay, thank you, Ron. We first, I wanted to comment that we're missing several, as we alluded to at the start of our regulars, but one of them is Cowboy Mike, or Michael Grauer, from the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, which, by the way, will be our next program again. But he is actually in Hungary at this time.
They sent him to Hungary?
Yeah, yeah. He's going to appear he's supposed to appear all day yesterday and give guests, and I can't even begin to pronounce this, Mora Ferenc Museum in Szeged, Hungary, where he has curated a museum over there, and he's given them a tour of that museum today. So, I mean, we've actually got kind of, I guess, international outreach thanks to Michael on some of that. But
And it demonstrates the global interest in the cowboy, which of course all goes back to the beginning of the Chisholm Trail.
Absolutely.
And Michael's going to talk to us if, for those that weren't able to make it to the conference in October, they have an amazing hat exhibit there at the museum of all the famous hats. And I had the opportunity, because I went to the wrong location when you guys were supposed to be at the Native American Museum. And Jeff and I got a tour of the hat exhibit, but there's all kinds of famous cowboy hats in that museum, and Michael's going to give us a tour of that next month. So, and John, I'll send you the links, so we'll get you on there so you know what's going on each month. So.
Thank you, Lonnie, and thank you for all our many visits.
Well, it's been great to get to visit with you. So.
Yeah, and happy holidays to everybody.
Thank
John,
you.
Thank you,
John, thanks for all your work you've done for the state of Texas and the history. Really appreciate it.
You're very important in all this planning. Yeah, believe me. Keep me posted on what's going on.
All right, we'll do.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
So be sure and join us for our Cattle Trail Showcase next month. That would be the second Friday, January 13, 2023, believe it or not. So to close our program today, this is Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate, saying thanks for taking time to join us in this place, and come on back next month for our Cattle Trails Showcase.
Thank you.
Happy trails, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thanks.